Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about a theory that I'm bringing to you. This is not me talking about someone else's theory. This is someone talking about their own theory. That's me. Deep Thoughts. Here we go. This is called the 100-Year Theory. And this is the culmination of many rumors and claims over the years that, you know, they always say, well, the military is 20 years ahead. You know, whatever you could think of, oh my God, they're so far ahead. And for some people, that's a very romantic statement. They love that idea that their military is so advanced. And there have been reports in the ufology community where, especially with Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer's Project Disclosure, one of the most credible eyewitness interviews that he had was a gentleman who was a guard. I believe he was in Chile. I think that's where he was. South America somewhere. And they had tracked some vehicle traveling an amazing amount of aeronautical miles per hour, seemingly crashing into the surface of the earth. And they rushed out to see what the hell it was. And this is when he sort of confirmed that, you know, they saw a UFO. It was crashed into the side of a mountain. It was sort of like a teardrop. And he said this ooze was coming out. They said the chrome surface of this vehicle was sort of like a petroleum purple. You know, like you look into a pond and it's got all this wild white light refraction going on there. But he said no sooner did he get closer to the vehicle and started feeling like he was communicating with the occupants inside, that these vehicles that he could not recognize, he said some of them looked like helicopters, I believe, but he goes, they were way advanced, and he goes, they were traveling also very quickly. He goes, they came out of nowhere and started bullying everyone. And what was really fascinating was part of his story, and again, in terms of reading a person's face and reading their tics and stuff to see whether or not they're telling the truth, this dude passes with a 10 out of 10. So either he's been hypnotized to believe this stuff, or he is really telling the truth, because he said some things that were very interesting. And he said that these sort of commando guys showed up, and he said they didn't really have any, I believe he said didn't have any markings that were based on a particular government alliance. However, they did speak English. That was interesting. And they were very angry that he and his colleagues were there. They said, you're not supposed to be here. Get the F out of here. Lots of F-bombs, a lot of treatment, a lot of pushing him around. He said he was held captive for 14 hours during some interrogation. He said pretty much they were just trying to scare me for 14 hours straight to say, you know, you didn't see this, you do understand, right? You didn't see this, you didn't see this, which is so interesting that these people, this accounting is very common. And, you know, for everyone that wants to believe that the rulers of the world are absolute evil, and I think some of them are, and some of them aren't really leaders, they're just perverts with money. They participate not in what happens in this planet, but they're let go, right? So there's a value of life for these individuals, which is kind of cool. But here's the theory. It's called the 100-Year Theory. What if our leaders or our owners, people you've never seen before in your life, people of which you have no idea what their last names are. They're not Rothschilds, they're not Habsburgs. They're way out of sight. But they're at least 100 years ahead of us. 100 years. And I think it's very interesting to propose this at this particular stage of 2017, going into 2018, because we have reached a stage in computer-generated imagery that if we want to spend the time and the money we could create any image that we need to or want to. And society, I would say that less than a fraction of a percent of people would even suspect it wasn't real, other than maybe what's being enacted in this script not being real, right? But visually speaking, you'd say, why are these living beings telling this lie when the whole thing is actually computer generated? That's just one example, right? The kid in Chile who sees the UFO and sees this band of folks come in out of nowhere is essentially saying, look, we took 4 hours to get to this zone because it was so jungle bound or whatever, bad terrain, and these folks just flew in seemingly 2 seconds, right? So when we talk about things like being ahead, we have to quantify what metrics we're talking about. Is it energy systems, propulsion systems? Is it medical? Is it mental and spiritual? Is it a third eye thing? Or is it all the above? Right? The House of Windsor, very interesting family. The women tend to live, especially if they're not chain smokers, but in this day and age, as long as they take care of themselves, they make it to 100 in that family. We haven't had a man pass away within the Windsor family for quite some time. There does seem to be this obsessive push on Netflix to talk about the Windsor family. I don't know what the deal is with that. Not all of it's favorable, but in the end, it kind of scays through, and there's some good things on the other side. Apparently, every episode of The Crown on Netflix has to be certified by the royal historians or whatever. It's very interesting. I was told once, this is a non sequitur, but I was told once that if you wanted to have the Eiffel Tower in your movie as a main character, you actually have to get permission from the country of France to put it in your movie such that you're not taking a dump on it, right? If you want Godzilla to knock it down, they may turn you down. It's very interesting, right? I don't know if we have the same thing. And I don't even know if that's true, but I was told that in the hallways of Hollywood once. But there seems to be some medical treatment that keeps people alive as soon as you have a shit ton of money. And again, what is it? The Windsor family owns like 6.5% of the world money. And she owns a crap load of other inhabitable land all over the place. Some medical care that is very sufficient. Computer processing technology is almost indistinguishable 10 years prior. All right, you go back 10 years, you're like, geez, man, I would not want that. But what's interesting is, if you're 30 years old at least, you can look back on 10 years old time. It's phenomenal how fast it goes. So imagine 100 years, take a silicon chip, take fiber optics, say 1900, and say that right around that time it was starting to bring war for the new upcoming war that's going to be really fun in the late 30s, early 40s. They're rocking Tesla stuff. We know Tesla wires that ran on electricity. He had, a ceiling that was lit without lights, beam just like the pyramids and the plateau. But look at the pyramids. There are people that don't believe that there was any electricity. Pi. And someone saying, well, I didn't see any wires, man. Didn't have any wires. When he built his big giant antenna, plasma energy to a point where it then collides with conductive materials and becomes aggravated valence, which will turn into electricity, right? We have conventional bombs and bullets forever and ever and ever, right? In fact, cannons during the Civil War and World War I, and we have muskets and stuff in the Revolutionary War. Nuclear fucking bomb. And I know that I've done an episode on a hydrogen bomb, and the only thing that explains that being not real for me, for the Russian footage, because it's very raw. It's not just to scare back to the Americans, see, we could blow up a building too, or a whole city full of buildings, but EW. But if you do the super deep dive into atomic weapons, you'll probably fork off into the they don't exist thing. And they blame it on a false understanding of how the Earth works, and they call out ice age resets all the time. Okay. Now, if you, by the way, cross over into Do Craters Exist episode that I did, then round point, just like, again, the crash of Superman's little ship from Krypton, right? So let's keep going. Let's start off the ninth trail behind it. She was born in 1912, so this would be 1920 to 1925. Somewhere in there, as an infant, she saw these, which is good. So when she sat down and told me, and I looked at her, and she kind of looked at me, assholes, and said, no, we don't want to pay a civilian for flight. We want to, but again, you know, tons of people have taken photographs of these things. I shouldn't say tons, but there's drawings into the ground that you can only see from space. A little bit of artwork, and then kind of looked at each other and said, you know what? It'd probably be best if we didn't let all these Neanderthals and all these bizarre, you know, jungle people discover this technology, which we have no idea when. But it's better that we hold this to ourselves, because they're going to use it for military and really horrible stuff, and we just want to kind of sip champagne and look around, right? 1947, we have a vehicle that crashes in the middle of the night due to a storm. I was extremely skeptical about the crash of Roswell in 47. I think something did crash. I think they did see something out of this world, and I think there were beings on this vehicle. And the only way I think that it didn't happen would be that all the eyewitness testimony that I have heard, Jim Ramey's and all of his constituents that worked on weather balloons 100% of the time, especially the people that were playing the bridge game, they would have had to have all been hypnotized and convinced of this completely, which reveals a whole other technology that I'm unaware that we have. So as long as that didn't occur, this thing occurred. Now, whether or not we have 9 other vehicles and Bob Lazar sitting in S4 reverse engineering some antimatter engine, I don't know. But this theory is going to basically say, yeah, oh, totally. And not only did we recover this stuff, but perhaps the alien dude just said, oh, yeah, this is how it works. Which kind of cuts out Bob Lazar's need to be there. Medicine. So medicine goes both a positive and a negative in the 100-year theory. Obviously, the positive is to keep these individuals extremely healthy. Put them in a little booth like Prometheus, and then you just say, analyze me and fix me, right? But the dangerous part is to genetically engineer the rest of us, those of us who are not flying around in cigars, observing the world and toasting champagne. We know that hexagonal crystals are being dropped out of skies using patented nano dye technology, and then a piezo effect hits the little crystals, and it starts to eject these cylindrical extrusions, which can encapsulate all kinds of inventions like gene splicing nano devices. That's where you get the theory of Morgellons disease, right? We know that vaccinations are this huge push by the world elite to utterly hobble the minds of children. You know, I've got probably 3 average, acquaintances of mine on Facebook that post raw vaccination videos of children being literally shot up with 4 to 6 shots at a time, the child screaming and crying, and this moron is posting it on Facebook like, oh, isn't that cute? My buddy John V, that's all I'll say. He is an absolute warrior of great information, and he keeps, he posts, he's really taking it on the chin, I think, probably with his friends and family to bring the truth out. And I am friends with him, so I post a lot of his stuff over on our side. But understanding the absolute destructive nature of injecting aluminum and mercury into a human body, regardless of what you think you're doing with immunization or inoculation, those 2 substances should never be put in the human body, right? There was a big thing in the 70s, at least I discovered in the 70s, about lead poisoning. It used to be leaded gas, and they pulled all the lead out because you'd sit there and breathe it. Your fumes would come around from your car gasoline and, I guess, make you sick. Lead paint was banned because there was a funny little thing where I was, for whatever reason, I didn't have markers, I didn't have crayons, I guess, but I had a coloring book. So I had this pencil. And I'm sitting there going, I'm like 3 or 4 years old, and I'm pissed that all I've got is a pencil to fill this thing in. And I'm pretty sure I would have had a crayon somewhere, but for whatever reason I couldn't find it or whatever. I don't think I had any, though. I was so pissed off they wouldn't get me any at the time. I'm like, I'm an artist, man. I need shit. So in a fit of rage, I fucking stabbed my coloring book with my pencil, my number 2 pencil. It went straight through the coloring book, right into my right knee, right above the kneecap. And it broke the tip of the pencil off into my leg. And it is still there to this day. But I remember my parents thinking, oh my God, is he going to have lead poisoning and all this other stuff? And why they didn't take me to the doctor to get this out of my leg, I don't know. And what's actually interesting is that there's a circle of hair around this that doesn't grow. Yeah, man, that's what happened to me. I think my father said, it's not lead, honey, it's carbon. And I don't know what's true, actually. I never looked that up. It's all faded now into my leg like an old tattoo. But now think of what we, as let's just call ourselves the peasants, the sheep, the cattle, have been able to kind of uncover about the genetic code of man. Again, if you study Bruce Lipton, you're going to find out that we have been utterly deceived with the Genome Project. Medical doctors are taught dogma theory. It's a real thing about how the theory of the cell works, which is incorrect. The nucleus of the cell is not the brain of the cell. The membrane of the cell, membrane, is the actual commander-in-chief of the human cell. The center is used to repair the cell, but it is not the when should I do this thingy. A chromosome is always glorified in Hollywood as this double helix bag of DNA, nucleic acid chains, but it's actually 50% protein patterns, which are the schematics to tell the DNA what to do. So the Genome Project has basically 50% of the information. It's missing the other 50%, which is what protein patterns tell the chromosomes to do what. I just went to Bruce Lipton's site. You just go to brucelipton.com, and there's a book that he read and wrote, which I paid $70 for back in the day. It's called Wisdom of Your Cells, or Wisdom of the Cells, or something like that. You can actually listen to him read it on YouTube, but the 3 books that he has available right now don't have that book. And I don't know why. I don't know. Usually there's like a royalty problem. For any of you who know Bill Still's work on the Money Changers, he created this 3.5-hour video in the 90s where he did this impeccable job running around the world educating us about various currencies. And it turns out he got had by a jerk who took all the money. And so he no longer really promotes that. You can still buy it, but he doesn't make any money from it. So he created Oz, like the Wizard. It's not the Wizard of Oz, but it's his version, his redo of it that's only a couple hours long. It's got a much higher production value. But if you really want to see the bomb, you go look at Money Changers from the 90s as well as his other ones. He's got another one on Jekyll Island as well. But now let's think about this for a second. Some of you might roll your eyes and go, well, this is a pathetic attempt to create a theory. All right, maybe. But let's go one step further. We think of a 100-year theory as strictly being something to do with technology. Whether it be creating computer graphics that are indistinguishable with reality, to medicine, to all kinds of different forms of science. But let me tell you, probably one of the most powerful things that you probably already believe, which makes the 100-year theory perhaps a 10,000-year theory or even more. And that is, those who know true history are probably the most powerful people in existence. If you truly know who the leaders of the world have been, if you truly know the stages of various societies, I mean, from the encapsulated Aborigines that were discovered on the continent of Australia, to the Eskimos, to the Native Americans, to the Incas down below, what we call our Southern Latin folks, because they weren't really Latin until Spain came over, but all the different stages of Europe, all the different stages of Asia and Eurasia and Africa. If you truly knew all the history of everything that's ever occurred, how powerful do you become? Right? There's two different forms of mental behavioral science. There's sociology, the study of groups, and then there's psychology, the study of the individual mind. What if you had 50,000 years worth of knowledge about it? The frailties, the strengths, the weaknesses, all that stuff, right? Especially the sociology side of things. A group of people are willing to tolerate this. They are not willing to tolerate that. If you want them to tolerate that, you've got to boil them like a frog, really slow. Ebb into whatever change that you want to have happen. At that point, the rulers of the world would not really, it'd be like, well, we've done socialism 100 times. We've done capitalism 100 times. They have eternal flaws because the tiny little electrons in the circuitry of society, which are individuals, vary so widely in cultural differences and educational differences, religious differences. We can't say we have subatomic particles in society that behave the same. Imagine you're trying to build a computer that relies on electrons, but the behavior of every electron is a little bit different. You get a kind of a surge of Christian electrons that seem to do one thing with that coil over there, and you get a bunch of jihadists over here that seem to do this with the capacitor over here, and you can't get things to do what they're supposed to do because everyone's completely different and they disagree. And the other part is, for all of those of you who've said the government is 20 years ahead of everyone else, right? I think 99.9% of anyone who says that is merely mocking something that they've heard online, right? The other fraction of a percent are individuals that have worked for the military in skunk work projects, and then you have this sort of relative definition of that was pretty cute. And I come get you. You're my neighbor. You watch this show. You're an average human being, or maybe above average because you watch this show. And I bring you over. That's pretty cool. That one thing you did, yeah, and I haven't seen anyone do that before, but I'm sure someone's done it in the military or something like that. But that's pretty cool. And so we have a little fun moment, and you're like, wow, you're a little ahead of, other folks that don't build robots. That I'm like 20 years ahead. You might go to your neighbors and go, man, this guy's really cranking out some cool stuff. Okay. Now, let's say for some reason I could go to Africa. The patterns, if they're going to go hunt a lion, they put the hunting pattern on. If he's going to mate with his wife to create life, he paints a different fertility pattern or whatever. And he goes back home to his tribe, safe and sound. And again, for some reason, we speak each other's language. Either I learn his or he learns mine or whatever. He's going to say, of us, thousands of years ahead of us. And he'd be probably some third world places are so much further ahead than tribes that haven't been really discussed in comparison to the 100-year theory. The only thing keeping you from probably you saying, I don't want to believe that, because that puts me in jeopardy. And the only thing that puts you in jeopardy in your mind is the ill intent of said technologies. If someone said, captors. For those of you who are into flat earth and you believe in a firmament dome, well, the dome owners, this is a Truman Show. It doesn't solve for God, but it definitely erases religion. Now, if you want to take the 100-year theory and make it the 100,000-year theory, then you could have individuals come down here and behave like messiahs to get everything on the right track. And then you could think about it in the sense that all of the Jesus parables, which go back to, well, I guess with technology, smoke and mirrors, this could be the case. They believed that several thousand years ago, if not just 1,000 years ago, that ownership over the planet. Everyone would be enslaved. And so this woman had a cloaked spaceship, this is the spoiler, cloaked spaceship around this planet, and she was using special effects and all kinds of tectonic plate shaking to create Earth, anything that you wanted her to be. Because when the Star Trek people came down, she turned into... Figured it out, that's right. Well, that's sort of an archetype for the 100-year theory. All of these fake massacres have all these holes. I mean, if they're that advanced, why are there all things had taken place? Then why haven't they done it already if they're so powerful? So there's a couple theories there. If our owners are different than the banking cartel that pisses us off and the monarchies that still fucking exist, kings and queens, can you believe it? That they put someone else's face on their money that just is really the kingpin of serfdom. In America, we put our leaders on our money, leaders that did things that were at least perceivably noble at the time that they existed. You know, Abraham Lincoln, for God's sakes. Not just you were born into some... Interesting that the only people that seem to ever rise up to power are say, oh, humans are so inferior and so bad. Let's hand it off like some Automa episode. We attempted to see what human beings can do. I mean, we have just really crawled out of our own primal path just within the last 150 years. Right? It is interesting when you do find these tribes out there in the rainforest of South America and in the jungle, crazy cannibalism, and they have a lot of genocidal wars, but most of that is the proliferation of it until you start creating shelters and villages and towns and that sort of thing. But now what if the owner, they're watching an experiment? Their whole idea is not to... At the same time, there may be this sort of laissez-faire approach if UFOs that we have seen from time to time are them in some sort of lead, you know, if you got your little bubble from and massage the prime directive since Next Generation in this world, the bankers, the royalty, taking ownership of her own mind a little bit, but she did, you know, she cranked out 4 kids and. You know, she took on all this responsibility accordingly. They know about captors. For those of you who are flat earthers, think about the fact captors, it brings up some pretty bad imagery, so I should probably use a different word. It's not like we're locked in the basement, you know, being tortured and raped or something. They're just the people. The one thing that keeps ringing in my brain is that their moon is too big for Earth. And then people are trying to study the sphere that you think is Earth and make it, I don't know, just for the sake of argument, 10 times Truman Show Dome, right? The Truman Show Dome seemed like it was an entire world. It was a big city, and as a form of entertainment. Hell, we have Michael Crichton's West. Again, it is sort of the firmament dome thing, and people inside there, the robots especially, the non-player characters, they don't know that they're in this thing. They wake up, they have a routine. Again, they're not aware of a border, but they don't care. They like where they are. I've said it several times on the show. When I grew up in a small town, there were times when I would go, 6 to 10 months not leaving a 6-mile township, a 6-mile square patch of land, and I didn't care. I had everything I needed: my music, my computers, my motorcycle, whatever. I had it all. So that may be, if there is very little communication, perhaps no communication between those that would be in this pocket of advanced technology and those that are basically bankers here, then things like 9/11 are floppy and weird and strange and have all these holes in them because it's not part of that group. But I think I want to rewind here for 1 second to give you a bit of a pinch point in this story. Let's slow down the theory. The 100-year theory is based on the notion that human beings would have figured out, I'm going to say human beings probably with an asterisk over it, but someone thought wisely that coveting technology provides extreme power, right? What if we didn't tell people we had a computer? What if we didn't tell people we had medicine that could could make you feel better. Matter of fact, what if we, the Egyptians, who have, I think, fairly well proven that they had a deep understanding of electricity, and the Egyptian Masons, who are now in their 90s and hundreds, who are saying, look, we used to heal human bodies using frequencies of sound and electricity to resonate out the invaders in the human body. So you got a bacteria in your body, you resonate the body with a particular frequency, and it shatters the cellular membranes of the invaders. It shatters the RNA patterns that are trying to steal the replication of your DNA when it splits in half. They covet, they hold it back, but they nurture it and nurture it and nurture it. Most of you know that probably at least 80 years ago, if not further back, we have fairly solid evidence that secret laboratories were created, 2 or 3 in the world at least, and they have spliced human beings with absolutely everything you could conceive of, as well as insects and animals, animals and animals, insects and insects, humans and insects, humans and animals. There are stories coming out all the time now that we have spliced together, I think, a goat human or a pig human. This is just like breaking stories in December of 2017. So we're pissing and moaning that someone wants to use stem cells to cure people like Christopher Reeve before he died. When you don't have to get stem cells out of infant dead babies. But what if a child did pass away and the adult's got his whole organ transplant thing all signed up on the back of his driver's license, but you can't take a baby that's passed away and cure, 100 people who are quadriplegic or paraplegic? I couldn't think of a better use of a tragedy than to do that. I don't know what the ratio is of what you could harvest from a child like that, and I know that sounds horrible, but your baby was not the flesh and bone. Your baby was a soul. You may even have that child again if you continue having children. But let's also look at some sectors of where technology allows domination. We have essentially geographical, spatial areas of domination. We have, first and foremost, land. Can you command an army of people, an army of technology, to conquer land, to take someone's backyard, front yard, home, everything, and then convince them through paradigm that you're superior to them and they should be the authoritative figures over you? Convince a bunch of bullies to, carry guns and call themselves, law enforcement. This is no slam on law enforcement, but, we're talking about these people creating covert operations to do things. So you have a bunch of paradigm that you teach the mind. That's one region of existence where, again, how many of you talk about national debt? How many of you talk about debt in general? Well, debt is in your brain. Debt is a complete construct in your brain that doesn't really exist in society. Right? We shouldn't covet resources so that we have more and someone else has less. We do have to control our population. It is true. But where else are there geographical places, spatial places where domination is important? If you're one of them, if you want to control the experiment. Well, the sea was the next one, right? Magellan, running around. First, we conquered the coastlines because we always had resources. As long as we were right next to land, we could always go into land, grab some food, grab some resources, maybe even repair a boat with some wood. We might have to learn some new food supplies. I'm sure there were coastlines with no food at all, coastlines that were too intense to traverse, especially ice coastlines. But you could create a granary inside your ship, and when you found a jackpot, you could grab a bunch, put it on the boat, and get it, way down the coastline, go past a couple bad areas. And then we got into sort of what they call deep sea, the center of oceans. You could cross big oceans. And then we created, before planes, we created submarines. And so we started going down into the ocean, down into the water, and started kind of trying to dominate this gigantic, infinitely large, in comparison to land mass, areas, because it's very three-dimensional. Right? On the surface of a continent, you basically have a Cartesian coordinate system, an X, Y. You don't have Z. Until they started maybe digging military tunnels or something, right? Next up, the sky. And the sky comes in layers, doesn't it? The first vehicles couldn't go that high at all. World War I was fought with biplanes, not very high up. By World War II, we started going up much higher, thousands of feet up into the sky. Now, when I visit relatives in the Midwest, well, I'm traveling at 35,000 feet. 7 miles on average. If I get on a private G5, I'm going to go another 10,000 miles over that. Okay, well, let's keep going. We know rockets launch. I just watched the SpaceX launch yesterday over Los Angeles. Absolutely wild looking. So, we know that these exist. They do launch rockets. Whether or not you think that they drop air balloons up there or whatever, doesn't matter. There's now domination at about 200 miles up to probably about 350 before the Van Allen bells start killing human beings, right? We have intercontinental ballistic missiles. Seems pretty real, man. You know, we've seen right after the moon missions were over, you know, the moon missions, the whole purpose was to create military rockets, not, hey, let's go to the moon. It wasn't about that at all. They didn't give a shit about the moon. That's why it never happened. I'm sure they would have if they could have, but they knew they were another 100 to 200 years away from that little game. But now let's talk about those of you, while we're there. We have outer space, leaving Earth. Well, it could go a lot of places really, really fast. For those of you who've been studying the lunar waves, you are now looking at the moon and Project Bluebeam, probably for the last 10 years or so, combining all the knowledge together, and essentially realizing that, well, maybe the moon's a projection. I know that sounds crazy. I'm not exactly a believer in that, but I'll tell you what, the lunar wave thing is really bizarre. Even when you try to compensate for the distortion of the atmosphere. You know, some of you who are firmament dome believers believe it's a wave in the ocean. I think it'd be a lot more aggressive if there was actually some sort of wave up there. But, you know, if you want to believe that the moon is a projection, then you could certainly account for the fact that it's too big. But it's a lot of work, folks. It's a lot of work if you were to put something out there, and I don't know any benefit at all of putting it up there. That we are in some sort of World of Warcraft. It's some massive multiplayer online role-playing game, right? Hey, maybe. Maybe. At that point, the 100-year theory is way beyond 100-year theory, and it is definitely, in a way, true. Now, for those of you who have picked up on my Automa reference, there's a movie called Automa. That's what I'm calling it. It's got Antonio Banderas. It's now free again on Netflix. It's a long watch. First half, I think, is utterly brilliant and qualifies as sort of a prequel to the world of Blade Runner, minus the depopulation arc in the story. But, you know, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler alert. Let's see if I can say this without giving up the spoilers. Sometimes I've said they're spoilers and I don't give it up. But essentially, humanity experienced this horrible problem. This is in the credits at the very beginning, so this isn't a spoiler at all. You can't get into the first live-action scene without understanding this part of it, which is the sun gets really active and starts to irradiate the Earth. And they don't really blame it on global warming or anything like that, but it just starts to irradiate us so much that we have to put these sort of blimps up in the sky to create, I guess, a rain cleansing ritual where everyone has to go inside. The rain cleanses all this radioactive material out of the sky, and then it washes down into the drains, and everyone can have kind of a day outside for a little while. Most people are inside, and they needed to create these things very quickly to save society, and so they created this robot called the Pilgrim. And the Pilgrim was very handy, very well received by humanity, because humanity was obviously having a huge problem surviving this alteration in the sun. And Tony Banderas is an insurance agent for the robot company that built the Pilgrim, and they're kind of struggling because society rebelled against the Pilgrim at some point. It's not really explained, but it's very similar to Douglas Adams' story, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when everyone rebelled against the robots, and the robots didn't understand why they were being rebelled against. They're like, look, we're following Asimov's prime objectives / protocols. We're not going to hurt you. I don't know why you're beating us up. So the world's gone through this whole phase, and there's very few pilgrims left, and the ones that are left are very constrained. But the twist in the story is that some of the robots seem to be sentient all of a sudden. They're not evil at all. They're just seemingly having emotions and participating in society a little bit different than they have in the past, right? Antonio Banderas bumps into the problem and has to solve, in order to solve a claim against a robot going tits up, he bumps into the conspiracy. And, there's definitely some sentient things going on with these robots, and there's sort of a kingpin robot that is the grand poobah of all this stuff, which you'll discover in the film. This really doesn't hurt you at all in the film. You can really enjoy it. Again, the last half gets really long. I think in the end, the interesting thing about this film, Automa, is that the takeaway is very interesting. The intellectual kind of gestalt of the movie is very interesting to take away and think about. So for those of you who are sort of into the cerebral sci-fi, definitely get to the end. You will start to see what I'm talking about here. But what if, instead of being robots, it's us? That we are technically what we call organic robots, because we're not made of precious metals. We're made of organic mass. And as I've always said on this show, and it actually came out as a result of doing episodes on this show, I think everything that has life is beautiful. And I think it's been designed very explicitly. Look at the dragon mantis. Look at all these. There's a mantis that's red and black. It's still an amazing invention. Spiders are freaky for a lot of people. Snake hunting. Well, we got ones with 8 eyes. We have these centipedes, and but we realized, and we're essentially the latest model that's being incubated in this reality, the Homo sapiens sapien. We've been imbued with what would seem to be the intellectual stem cells of whatever creator created us. The sense that we are. The sense that we can have this show and that you can listen to me and participate in a comment section on a frickin' YouTube channel. That's pretty awesome, right? All you're doing right now is flooding yourself with either the audio through your computers, which is this pattern of electrons that have been stored in some digital format so that you can hear my voice, that you can totally feel me, man, right? If you put the video on, you get a little bit more sensory input. One of the biggest questions that man has about his existence is the purpose of our existence. And it's always this sort of nebulous thing. I'm going to make it an episode that really goes into this deep, but I'm not going to reveal it here just yet. But if you were to say we had some sort of captor or some creator or creators that are participating in this experiment, and they're, again, more on the lines of maybe 100,000 years, 1 million years ahead of us, 3 million years ahead of us, then what we see makes sense. Of course, if man could get rid of the oligarchy from the world and the monarchy from the world, all the bankers are gone, everything's gone, and we can figure out a loving way to control world population, super duper educate. I mean, every sex ed class is gone. You can just learn about the biology of the human mind. We don't teach 3-year-olds to question their gender, that kind of stuff. We get out of that stupid regiment that we have today and go back to hardcore sciences and art, right? We could get to a point where we become amazing again. I think for Americans, and again to my listener that constantly reminds me that Americans should pretty much stick to America when they're talking, and I totally agree. I think I'm pretty good about not claiming other regions of the world in any massive detail besides just some broad stroke stuff. But eventually we would learn how to make everything happen. You know, on this show, I'm a big proponent of ethereal winds and ethereal particles, and some people still hang on to farty physics that hasn't invented shit, you know. They just invent more physics. They just invent more theory. They don't invent any inventions that you use to make your household work, right? You know, think about all these papers that you read about scientists in Cambridge or Oxford or MIT or Caltech. Well, you know, a scientist has figured out we probably have at least 33 dimensions of reality. And it's like, okay. Yeah, and my coffee still takes 5 minutes to fucking make here. Okay. So, not terribly interested in what your little circular logic, thesis said to get you a fucking PhD in something that doesn't help the world. You know, Tesla. One thing that's interesting about Tesla, he didn't run around the world getting PhD after PhD after PhD, but he could have. But he didn't have any peers to give him a PhD. He didn't have any peers to read his thesis, right? In fact, if they did, they would have been horribly jealous of him. Just like, again, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the guy that, he created the improbability drive. He was lynched by his fellow scientists who realized that the one thing they hated more than anything was a smartass. Someone who was smarter than them, right? I will give credit to human beings that create things that improve society. I was sitting next to a gentleman at my smoke shop this last week, and a very open-minded guy, mid-20s, and one thing he told me right from the very beginning when I first met him was he was getting into Pink Floyd, and I said, good, because if you do that, your generation could save this planet. And he goes, man, everyone's getting back into the 70s. And again, I will say that in America, okay, from 1975 to 1985, you have the absolute golden era of artistic moment for this country. There's been a beautiful bunch of eras before that, okay? Don't get me wrong. But in terms of film, music, art, and going to the next level, this country has never seen a better decade of time. That's the way the world should be. Going in that direction. We should be experimenting with our consciousness, using under scientific observation, under a protected scenario. We should drop acid. We should. We should be in an environment that is like literally like a laser tag building where you could have individuals that have done 100 trips or whatever. They know what you're going to be experiencing. They put you in a safe place. They psychologically evaluate you before you take any, and if you pass all the tests, meaning you don't have a bunch of negative crap in your closets that will eat you alive once you reduce your barriers, then you can take it. But if we raise kids properly in this world and educated them properly and then kept them away from violence and an oversexed population and gender questioning and all this other crap, they'd be ready to take a trip whenever they want to take a trip. The government gave this stuff to like 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds back in the 60s, and they survived because they didn't have this horrific life. They had, next to Leave It to Beaver kind of lives, right? Europe is trying to absorb a very small sect of individuals from the Middle East who are, again, 1,500 years behind the rest of society. It's unbelievable. You can't do that. You've got to educate. You've got to fix their native worlds and educate them up. But we covet, don't we? We covet down at our level knowledge. If any of you have watched my screenwriting episodes, you will hear me say over and over that one of the toughest things that happens with screenwriting is anyone who figures out how to do it quickly and do it well, they covet. They don't let anyone else know. As if, the world would be a bad place. And the reason why Hollywood, I think, sucks right now is that outside of the entitled generation of executives that run Hollywood that don't have any film backgrounds, but think they've seen enough movies to be able to create a good one, they'll see, we've seen how that's working right now, don't we? The writers don't want to research writing. It's interesting. And through nepotism or cronyism or what have you, they get the opportunity to write on these movies. You haven't seen a movie that hasn't had probably, unless it's like a Luc Besson movie where you've got a guy who's got enough money to hold script to himself, or even James Cameron uses other writers, okay? But your average movie that doesn't have someone like a Spielberg on top of it, I'm not sure his regimen at all, but it's been written by 30 writers. And it still sucks. It still sucks, you know? I ask people about Tron Legacy all the time. I said, do you like Tron Legacy? And they'll say, oh, yeah, it was awesome. I said, what did you like about the movie? Oh, it looked amazing. Yeah, it totally looked amazing. And the soundtrack by Daft Punk was phenomenal. Yeah, man, totally. I said, what do you remember about the story? Well, I don't really remember the story that much. It's because it sucked. It was a bad ripoff of the first franchise, trying to retell everything, but destroying everything that was wonderful about the first movie. 32 writers wrote that film. It was so poorly received that Disney fired the director right after it was over because he didn't want to take a single class on how to write a movie. He still hasn't taken a single class on how to write a movie, as far as I understand. He's having a hard time surviving. Let's not be that guy. Let's get educated about everything that we think matters in this world. And then the world will become a wonderful place, right? Let's go back to the 100-year theory for 1 second to close up here. Have any of you ever thought to yourself, by studying history, that after you study a segment of history, especially when you study it from a technological advancement cycle, you're like, wow, at this point, we got this technology. At this point, we got that technology. It seems to come in odd bursts, right? Why do we remember people like Isaac Newton, Faraday, Tesla? Because they debuted a new set of technology that made the world a better place by just simply understanding it better. Again, Einstein, not so much. Oppenheimer, not so much. They just wrote theoretical papers. It's like they were sitting in some sort of mathematical philosophy to continue going and continue going. You know, some of these inventions come out of some of those theories, but honestly, when you really track the technology, you're going back to Tesla almost every single time. And then the shoulders he stood on, which goes back to Faraday, who goes back to other folks, right? So if you've ever felt those cycles, I want you to think about the 100-year theory. If you were the captor of a society like ours, you might think, well, it's probably time we start releasing this old technology to them and see what they do. You know, we know our history. Let's just say we are the 100-year people that are way ahead of society. We know how we got to it. Let's see how they get to it. And they have a million means of putting this out there. They have schools that don't mess around. You know, Caltech, I guarantee you, doesn't mess around. The government gets most of their big thinkers out of Caltech. If you start showing an amazing academic aptitude in school, you get reported up through the chain as being one of these kids. Mensa tries to harvest people that can think for themselves and think more logically than emotionally. And we need emotion as well. But that's where you get your artists, your songwriters, your playwrights, your, television shows, your film shows, when they're not... I mean, we know that all these things today are littered with social justice warrior bullshit story arcs and that kind of stuff. But it's sort of like going to Disneyland today and saying, well, I hate Disneyland because corporations fund everything and the corporate brands are on everything. It's like, okay, yeah, I understand. But, let me just tell you one thing. You finance a $1 billion ride, right? Now, Disney is doing so well, they can actually do that. When they created Radiator Springs, they didn't need a bunch of sponsorship, but they could. I mean, if you say, look, we built a $1.1 billion extension to the California Adventure Park called Radiator Springs, which they did, and someone from Disney goes, look, if we're willing to put Toyota on the front of this thing, we can make $150 million off the initial investment and give it back to our bankers that we loaned ourselves the money from or whatever. But a lot of us can go to Disneyland or whatever Disney park that's out there, and we can start seeing Walt's DNA. That's why I like Disneyland. Like I always say, Walt Disney only ever went to Disneyland. None of the other parks were built before he died, right? But we start to see the Imagineers that also think like us, and they keep the essence of Walt alive. Okay, we'll take that and map it to society. There's no reason why this world shouldn't be one of the most amazing lives that we can live. From the moment we're born to the moment we die at a really nice old age due to the absolute attrition of our body's eating healthy food, exercising, being happy the whole time. There's no cancer, okay? There's no viruses or anything that can kill us. The common cold would probably be the only thing we'd have to kind of regulate, because it has to do with the temperature change and pH balance and all that kind of stuff in a world without chemtrails and a world without all kinds of other poisons. But say we clear all that out, you should be able to live on this planet from start to finish, and the only negative things that you come up with are perhaps getting your heart broken, perhaps a random loss, or like a natural disaster occurs and you lose a loved one or something like that, or you drive your car incorrect. But even that, we could probably fix cars to never have accidents. I mean, just think about that. No drunk driving deaths anymore because you get in your car and it drives you home. Obviously people are trying to make that happen, right? Now, it might not be 100 years, but it's damn close. I would say, for those of you who know Walt Disney especially, let's just keep using him. Tesla had his own visions of the future as well, but his were more cryptic and on paper and then shrouded when the government went and seized it all after he passed away. But Walt Disney created, park rides, which were sort of, the future of tomorrow sort of park rides, where they said, look at your kitchen if it was totally automated. Look at society. He made these park rides which had public transport controlled by computers. You didn't necessarily own your own vehicle, but if you did, it was more like a George Jetson, where you got in the car and the car used computers to figure out where it could fly without bumping into other folks. Well, that was in the mid-50s, for God's sakes. If you really go back to Buck Rogers and a bunch of the H.G. Wells work, we've had schematics on paper forever. Go back to Da Vinci. He had schematics on paper that said man should have the ability to fly, but it's always abandoned. Now, we know that if the average human being could fly their own car and drive wherever they wanted to drive, there'd be all kinds of air collisions and that kind of stuff. So we can't just make this stuff by itself. We've got to introduce other artificial intelligence to make sure that you can drive like they did in Blade Runner or Fifth Element, or the Star Wars prequels, where you can fly your ship in a big city full of vehicles and you never hit anybody because it's impossible. The computers will make sure that you have a safe path, right? So what I'm getting at is this. One, don't covet. If you figured out how to do something, you teach everybody who wants to know. Don't push it on anybody who doesn't want to know. And again, if you want to trick your kids into stuff, what I found is you don't go to your child and say, hey, would you like to learn how to draw? Would you like to learn how to paint? What you do is you fill the house full of all this equipment. You use it in front of your child, showing them the benefit of it. They can look over your shoulder and see how you do it. Let them ask the questions. Let them feel like they've stolen a pencil and a protractor or whatever in the paper, and they've hid it in their room and they're drawing stuff on their own. It's all a big secret, right? You let them own it, but you've actually kind of tricked them into it. I've raised my own daughter, and I've raised children of girlfriends that I've had for, a couple of years at a time. And I tell you, when I finally figured out the algorithm, I just started buying supplies and just giving it to them and just saying, well, there it is. There's like 400 markers of different colors. Here's a bunch of different paper. Here's a book that's bound that just has blank sheets in it. Fill it up. Do what you want. And then I would draw around them, and they would start watching me, and, we'd start getting into it. So I think you feel me. The 100-year theory. And let me give you sort of a way to view this moving forward real quickly. There's something called the 10-monkey experiment, but I believe it was actually done with 100 monkeys. And it was this experiment that proved that we communicate without verbal communication, because a monkey doesn't have an articulated palate inside the skull. They cannot talk like we talk. They can only howl because they have sort of a hominid chamber behind the nasal cavity, right? So they're unable to move their tongue like we move our tongue. But they took a monkey out of a sort of an agrodome of a bunch of monkeys, and I believe the real number was 100. And they pulled one inside of into a laboratory, and he was then alienated, untying a knot. But anyway, once it learned, it went back into the tribe. They let it sit for 1 week. Then they pulled in another monkey from a completely different sect time. Now, because they can observe all these monkeys inside this chain thing, this is how to do this. But through mental communication, they realized that there's essentially a high before. So we call it the 10 monkey experiment, but it was actually 100 monkeys. More sort of a layman's understanding. I'm not talking about the military industrial complex being years out. But again, I want you to look at the value of history. When you know all history is a gigantic matrix of cause and effect models. And they have been raised in a world where boom and bust cycles destroy all of their prospects. There's not a lot of growth. Once they get educated as to how ignorant they were, and the South Korean kids are out there just breakdancing better than anyone I've ever seen. It's all over America. Let's just duke it out through fighting, and it's artistic, it's fun, and nobody has any bad memories of it. You know, I used to make $100 a week as a kid doing that, dancing, the music and the clothing and all that kind of stuff. It was awesome. It was a negative town, and we were inside its envelope of art. And it was we painted the wall really red, and then we blew out the bricks really cool, which weren't proportional to the bricks the wall was actually made out of. But then I painted really beautiful cartoony water spewing out of this pipe, and it was like, and made it beautiful again. It's just a choice, man. It's just a choice to get out of the mundane and get into something creative again. Or some sub creature that is like maybe even a gray alien, or but at some point you've got to do something that's interesting. And every single person who can hear my voice has that inside them. I think most of you have over you. You'll never see a child more elated. Now you're talking. Now you start to see obsession in a beautiful way. You know, you're an asshole parent if you stop them from doing that, right? Privileged to do a lot of those things. And I will tell you that it's so liberating. Anyway, hope you feel me. If you haven't gone to Deep Thoughts Radio, which you can get to from the website, you do have to ask permission to be in there. If you have a very recent Facebook account, you need to give me a sentence why you think you want to be a part of the group, because then you look like a bot if you come in. I just had one this morning who registered and joined today and then had some crazy name and wanted to join the group, and I won't let him in. I don't want you guys dealing with that crap. We don't need bots spying on your use patterns, right? If you want audio inside your car or when you're jogging or out messing around, there are two options, iTunes and Google Play. So whatever device you have, it'll work beautifully. But if you just have a mobile device that you're using, just go to the website and click on the RSS feed. It will attach to your podcast reader and you'll be cooking with gas. I've also got a few of you on Patreon, which is really cool. Our subscriptions have just sat there and hovered at like 1,880. I mean, forever. It's amazing. We're not growing anymore on the YouTube channel. So either I'm not producing enough videos or we're getting ganked, or both. So whatever. If any of you think that there should be a lot of subscribers to this channel, the only way you're going to get it to happen is to share the crap out of this thing. I do think we benefit from increasing the numbers simply because we start to spread this information to folks, the episodes that you think are valuable. Share an episode. If you're going to share one with a friend or share one on your page or something like that, I would say try to find one that would grip everyone regardless of their travels, regardless of their conspiracy theory background or whatever, and let them find the other ones that are more controversial and skip them. Because if you post up a really hardcore one, they may go, why did you post this freaking weirdo in his backyard? But anyway, I appreciate you guys. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.